Seasonic, the heart of your system.
I'm the awarded for Kit Guru, and today's review is this memory from Team Group. It is called Xcalibur RGB, and the spec, which is essentially the name, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 MHz, dual channel, 2 modules, RGB, lights along the top. That's pretty much all there is to say about the memory in terms of a description of what it is and what it does, because RGB memory, we're really familiar with it. Every manufacturer now does RGB RAM, because how else do you differentiate one lot of memory from a different lot of memory? So there's the spec of the memory itself, there's the price obviously, and there's how well does the RGB work. The spec, it's Samsung B-Die, 3600 MHz is getting fastish. Once you get beyond 3200 MHz, you're looking good. 36 is reasonably fast. Once you get to 4000, that's really fast and generally horribly expensive. This is, and I hate putting a price on memory in a video because prices fluctuate so enormously, a penny under £189 for 16 gigabytes, which is perfectly reasonable. Expensive RAM of this speed is beyond 200, but you pay a premium for each bump in speed. And if you want to go to quad channel 32 gigabytes, Lord help you, in this day and age, that's going to cost you a small fortune. 16 gig is absolutely fine for gamers, we know this. The timings of the memory are a little bit on the slow side. So 18, 20, 20, 44, not quite as fast and tight as you might like, suggests that perhaps this memory doesn't perform quite as you might want. However, our charts say otherwise. In actual fact, and we found this a few times now with DDR4, if you compare one DDR4 with another, provided the speed is halfway sensible, and in this case I think 2933 is as slow as we've done in recent times, but certainly once you get past 3000 you really have to work hard to differentiate one memory from another memory. All the decent brands are compatible with most motherboards, such as this Gigabyte or a Z390 Master. It's worked absolutely fine in this instance, but in terms of performance, if you run a game test or 3D Mark or some such, there is nothing to choose. Blender, something like that, which is CPU intensive, Cinebench, nothing whatsoever to choose between memories. It's when you get to synthetic memory tests such as Ada64 specific memory tests, you suddenly see this 3600 MHz memory has more bandwidth, more read and write speed than say 3200, exactly as the numbers would suggest. 36 is bigger than 32, bigger numbers, but in terms of the benefit to the end user, you have to look really long and hard to find that benefit. In practice, it doesn't make a lot of difference. In this case, this PC on this test bench, the CPU, which is Core i9-9900K, the GPU, which is an RTX 2080, those are big factors. They make a big difference to how it performs, as indeed does the M.2 SSD. The memory, it's more of a removing a bottleneck from restriction on performance. This memory does a decent job. Now at the moment, I'm controlling the RGB in this pulsing blue pattern using Team's own Blitz software. This Xcalibur RGB RAM is compatible with the 4 motherboard lighting standards. So we've got Aorus Sync from Asus, we have Gigabyte RGB Fusion, MSI Mystic Light Sync, and ASRock Polychrome Sync. At the moment, the software is controlling the lights on the memory. The motherboard itself is just left to its own devices. If you have software installed on the board, you do not use Blitz, you use the motherboard's own software. So what I'm doing here is entirely incorrect, and I'm now going to fix that. That's better. With RGB Fusion from Gigabyte installed, this is the very latest version 2.0, came out just a couple of days ago. The board and the memory are working in perfect harmony, and indeed the software correctly identifies the Team Group memory in the set up the GUI. Now I have to be entirely open and transparent with you and say that installing the software was not quite as straightforward as you might have liked. I've previously tested this Gigabyte Aorus Z390 Master motherboard. I've used the RGB software that's available some weeks ago, version whatever the heck it was, and then when the version 2.0 came out I installed that. So I've been using the Gigabyte board as a Gigabyte system. When I received, when I came to review this Team memory, I uninstalled the Aorus software, installed the Blitz software, and it didn't want to know about it. I can only assume that the Gigabyte software is hooked into the operating system at some level. Cleaning out RGB software is just a nightmare. It's practically impossible. It either works or it doesn't. So I just took the coward's option and switched SSDs to a different installation of Windows that appears not to have had the Gigabyte software on it, and ran Blitz on this, and now I've reverted to the Gigabyte system there, which is an incredibly long-winded way of saying if you're going to install RGB anything, yes, obviously make sure you follow the rules, follow what they say, and don't have conflicting software installed, for sure. Nonetheless, in the event you follow what they say, you may still have problems, in which case it looks like clean installation is the only way forward. I find that vexing, but you know what you're going to do. So here we have the Gigabyte software controlling the memory and the board, and it's all entirely happy. And now we can actually look at what the memory is doing, and each of the modules has got 5 LEDs under the diffuser. You can see them quite clearly. In this pattern, it is crystal clear: light, 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 light. It's just obvious. Now, whether that matters once the board is inside a case, behind a window, semi out of sight, that's a different story. This is pretty much the worst case scenario. So I'm not going to jump up and down on team and say you've done a shockingly poor job, because they haven't. Nonetheless, if you want a more graduated, subtle effect, this might not be the memory for you. We have seen more sort of pinpointy lights from some other manufacturers in the past. We've seen better than this. This is somewhere in the middle, so it's perfectly okay. It's just nothing special. Also, I am somewhat at a loss as to why the heat spreader has this jaunty angle to it, because it just means it's taller, and worse than that, it's taller at the top of the board if the motherboard's installed in the usual way. If we're looking for clearance above the board, you know, say you're putting it all in one at the top of the case, the last thing you want is for this bit to be kicked up. You really want the memory just to be as low profile as possible. This memory is fairly high profile, physically high profile that is, and there's no benefit to the user. So if you happen to like the angled thing, great. If you don't, if you're looking at it going, well, that's just taking space that I don't want taken, I entirely sympathise, and I'm more inclined to that point of view. Cosmetically, aesthetically, the memory is absolutely fine, no problem. The lighting is perfectly okay. The software compatible, rather the compatibility of the memory, the RGB, with other manufacturers' software appears to be very good. I've only tested it with Gigabyte. If it works with Gigabyte, they say it works with all 4 manufacturers. I'm happy to take Team's word for that. So I'm going to say use your motherboard, which is bound these days to have RGB. Just forget about their Blitz software. You don't need it. Go with your motherboard manufacturer's software, and you'll be happy. The speed, 3600 MHz B-die, on paper looks good. In practice, 3600 MHz brings you no tangible benefit apart from when you run memory, bandwidth and latency benchmarks. In those tests, the 3600 gives you a benefit over 3200 or 3000 or whatever. Having said that, you're not paying a premium for the extra speed, so it's a freebie. That's fine. So overall, the memory itself works well and is entirely compatible with this board. It's happy, it runs at the correct XMP speed. Pricing is entirely reasonable. The RGB patterns and the way it syncs with the Gigabyte software, yup, happy with that. The physical height, bit over the top. That's not great. And the fact you can see the LEDs through the diffuser, that's not wonderful, but it's not a problem either. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Do hit the bell button and subscribe, then you'll be notified about more videos as they become available. I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This is Team Group Xcalibur RGB DDR4 3600 MHz.